my name is Todd Mesick. I've worked in IT since about 2000. After kind of a career change, switched primary security focus in 2013, and then all IR, all forensics in 2014, and decided that that was kind of the area I wanted to go into, so I went to Champlain, got my master's degree, finished up in 2017, thank God, and recently just started becoming an adjunct myself, so I can help give back a little bit.
Hello, my name is Moran. I spent 13 years in the Air Force doing stuff for three-letter agencies, stuff like that. Back in 2014, I started my own company and have been pretty much doing that since. So this is actually a 100% true story. This actually, ironically enough, took a very, very long time to fully play out. As Phil alluded to, like this honestly goes back almost a decade. This is how long that this entire operation actually took. And we did change the names of companies to try to ensure that, for the most part, everybody would relatively stay anonymous. So, our client in this case, we're going to have Callahan Auto Parts, obviously just keeping with the Tommy Boy theme. They received a call, of course, that something bad had happened in their environment. So they did some initial look on what exactly was going to happen. The live response stuff was run. And then sent to Todd, who was kind of the lead at that time for the internal company's analysis team. And also at the same time as all of that was happening, a competitor in their workspace who actually ended up being helpful initially in our situation actually called to reach out as well and claimed that they had some dealings in the past with this particular attacker so that they could essentially help them mitigate through their issue. So initially, we had just a very, very small amount of things to go through. We just had a total of 2 IP addresses, and literally that was it. Some of the systems that we identified based off of the initial thing is like, okay, like we need to go through this a little bit more. So at that point, the scope slightly expanded a little bit, and more data was collected and then sent to me. So what we found out was that we had your typical kind of malware persistence, nothing out of the ordinary, startup folder stuff, regular auto run, stuff like that. We noticed that the host file on each of the affected systems was modified, and then we had some anomalies in the DNS cache. So at that point, decided for me to come on site. So at that same time, what I did is I actually reached out to a couple of my friends in government spaces who I knew at that time had dealings with this particular group of actors who we thought that they were, and said that we had some new indicators to share with them. And at that point, like, okay, they're like, all right, well, you can give us the information back. So there was no formal sharing thing. There was no anything. Literally, like, I gave them indicators, and they brought the indicators in and then worked on sharing through the environment. So the sad thing about this is you would think that by now, like, all of these organizations would have this massive, like, information is free, we can share all this information back, all this stuff in place to actually, ensure your data is anonymized, everything like that. Like, there's still nothing that's truly in place for all of that. But just because there isn't a formal process in place doesn't mean that you can't share information back. Like, you just have to do it through informal things and, informal ways, again, like contacts, networks, stuff like that. Go ahead.
So to this point, everything we did was basically no cost, other than a little bit of shipping and things like that, some external hard drives. We went out, we took Brian's tool, we ran it to be able to get a lot of the data together, like DNS cache, memory, disk forensics, all that stuff, to bring it all in so that we could actually start analysis, because unfortunately the security program at that point was relatively new. We weren't tooled quite to the area we needed to be tooled to. So this was kind of like hey, we're going to look at this host by host until we get a solution. And this means that any size business can do this, right? It doesn't need to be some large entity, like the federal government or a Fortune 5 type company. Anybody can do it. We didn't even have a SOC at that particular point. We still kind of don't. And we don't have a multi-million-dollar security budget either. We have a small team, and we try to do what we can with what we have. And so it doesn't mean that you can function any less just because you're a small organization. We can still have a lot of important things to share with other people. So one of our notable things here is you need to be able to know the right people and the right companies ahead of time. And so things like getting out to summits or going to training or just going to meetups in your local area, because that's really, there's a lot of information that can be shared back and forth. And there's something we hadn't really had in place at that particular point. We've done a lot of focus on that now to make sure that we know who we can call, where we can call, and whether it's our competitors or it's our customers or our suppliers or whatever the case may be. So that's been something that's been very helpful to us.
So at that point, it was time for me to actually do my incident response consulting stuff and actually fly out to the client site. Again, we have a few IOCs, not a really whole lot to go on. We have some stuff that we shared back informally with us, but we at least had some initial things that we knew that, okay, this is kind of where we're going to start scope-wise and then kind of start our investigation from there. So generally, when you show up to a client site, like, you usually cost a ridiculous amount of money. For the most part, you're probably met with some hostility with the people who are already there. So, like, generally, this is how I picture, like, most consultants walking in, like this, oh yeah, we're getting this random consultant dude, and he's just going to show up and do his little awesome dance and everything like that. But the consultants always enter, when we show up, we always think we're that. Like, we show up the last possible second and save the day, and everything is just going to be amazing and sunshine and rainbows for the rest of our lives. So, start the investigation. We're about 4 hours into it or so. We have a whole bunch of new IOCs that were expanded from the initial set they originally had. Of course, because we're all about information sharing, like, we shared them back with everybody, including the competitor who initially offered to help. And at that point, we didn't hear from them ever again for actually several years down the road. And the reason that is it turns out that they actually still had an ongoing threat that was actually still active in their environment. They just didn't know it because they didn't actually run it all the way down. They thought they got to a stopping point, and that was the extent of it. And turns out they were still under attack just the same as Callahan Auto was. So one of the things that I always try to stress as much as possible is, like, when you share information, you share indicators, you share anything at all, like, you have to make sure that you share that as widely as possible. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're sharing classified information, you're sharing proprietary, anything like that. It's if somebody took the time out of their day or their schedule to actually, like, share information with you, like, when you find something new, relevant, especially to that thing that they shared back, like, absolutely share that back with them. Like, never ever let it be a one-way street of information, because we all know that's when you share information with the government, you really never get anything back from them. So let's make sure that we kind of share information as widely as possible. So after a little bit more time, again, this was all because of the interpersonal relationships, we found out that we had the C2 domains where they were going out. We had an idea of exactly what it was. So reached out to an employee of the company who was essentially in charge of these and said, hey, we need these taken down. Like, we have to stop the bleed right now before it gets any worse. And ironically enough, we gave them probably in the neighborhood of like 30 to 40 domains that they needed to take down. They reached back informally to us after they took them down and said, actually, we took down somewhere in the neighborhood of about 500 because they were all related to this threat activity, all related to the same sort of registration stuff and everything like that. And one of the things that is absolutely huge, especially for Callahan Auto, is that this actually ended up solving more problems before they could even potentially happen, because we took these proactive steps with regards to reaching out to companies and stuff like that. Like, because it's entirely probable that as the attack went on, as the investigation went on, like, they were just going to switch and pivot to other domains that were all related to this registration piece, but things were slightly different. So essentially, we're kind of doing our chessboard one move at a time to try to figure out exactly what is happening with them. And the main thing I want to highlight with that is it literally took one person who I met at a SANS conference eight years ago, probably. Just knowing that person and staying in contact with him, I was able to reach out and actually say, I need your help to take this stuff down. And while he wasn't necessarily the one responsible for doing it, he put me in contact with the people at the company who could. And sometimes you just happen to get incredibly lucky. Like, the old adage is, it's better to be lucky sometimes than to be good never. So sometimes you just get lucky, and sometimes you just happen to have everything fall perfectly into place. And a lot of times that just happens to be the one person who you know and are able to reach out to. So the other thing that we had the ability to, because of this information, is they actually shared additional stuff for us to look at without officially telling us to look for them. It was more along the lines of like, oh, by the way, you might want to check out these couple of things, but you didn't hear that from me. Go ahead.
So after about 40 hours, we had identified and remediated all the systems in the initial compromise, continued monitoring the environment, looking for additional activity, anything else we could come up with, change some of our tooling, roll out some stuff that we had bought in previously, but IT doesn't want to roll it out because they're afraid it's going to cause disruption. Well, guess what? In an incident, disruption goes out the window, right? So it's like, okay, get that pushed out, and started collecting more data. And the decision was made that, okay, I think we have all the stuff out, we're looking at stuff, we're monitoring stuff, we have good detection in place, or at least what we think is good detection. We can go home and continue our analysis remotely, so we don't have to sit in this location any longer. And so some of the things we're doing is actually looking at the malware itself. And one of the things I want to note with this is, if you have previous incidents and you bring in a consultant firm, and they give you a tool and you don't need it anymore, take it away. Don't leave it there. Don't leave it whitelisted. So you'll see the name of the firm probably here in the next slide, but it's not their fault. We put it there. We left it whitelisted, even though we didn't use the tool anymore. So in that whitelisted folder, all of a sudden it was like, whoa, look at all this malware that's in here. What is this? These don't seem quite right. And what we found out was, hey, this is actually whitelisted in every single security application. It's whitelisted from itself. It's whitelisted in our AV, right? And so, again, it's totally our fault. It's not, wasn't the fault of the company that brought this tool in. We should have done better to make sure that we took it out. So ensure that any application or security system is configured for your environment, and then regularly take out old, unused stuff, which is the way the company at the time was structured. It wasn't really easy to do because we kind of operated as 8 unique companies, so that's kind of why it just kind of got left there because nobody really wanted to make the call to get rid of it. So during a remote analysis, it occurred for about 3 weeks. We kept on looking at stuff, found additional malware, additional goals that they were trying to accomplish. And then all of a sudden, I get a call from our network guy, and he says, hey, there's something weird here. This doesn't look quite right. And so we start looking at it, and of course, flights are rebooked, and we start to return to the location. Luckily, he was fairly astute. Otherwise, we would have missed the activity. So we get on site for part 2. We notice more machines are compromised, and then we start to find compromised accounts as well. So a little frustrating because we had called for a global password change, and one of our admins decided to change back to his password before the change. So that was really irritating. So analysis revealed the attacker was using a very sophisticated form of persistence, not really sophisticated now, but when it was happening, it was brand new. So not a lot of people knew anything about it. A lot of people hadn't seen it yet. So it was like for us, it was like, wow, that's not good, because we were just getting to the point of being a basic security team, and when you start seeing advanced things like that that most people in the industry haven't seen, it makes it very difficult to detect. And the attack persisted on server using a siloed DLL with order hijacking. WMI was used. Again, wasn't very popular when this incident occurred, so it was something new that we needed to do. And it was used for persistence in and of itself. So it would use a WMI to create persistence mechanism for itself, so it would continue to run, which was another thing that we also found. And then we also found China Chopper, which was big back then, but on all of the OWA servers, so we ended up having to take that out. And I don't know if anybody's ever shut down their OWA environment. When people are used to having their email available all the time, it was not pretty. That was probably the worst out of all the incident. Was like, okay, no more, you can't use remote email from your home computer, nothing. Everything has to be 2-factor, everything has to be our asset, so it became really, really difficult. But we were able to find another IP address and some more locations just based off of that. And luckily, the attacker made some mistakes, which was good for us. So they left some web traffic, went out, and it was able to, we were able to roll that backwards. We did a quick packet capture and actually found out where the traffic was actually going. Because when you looked at the traffic in the firewall, it looked like everything was going to the US. And it didn't look anything kind of odd, things like Yahoo or Google or something like that. It's very hard to detect anything as an anomaly there. But after we rolled it back, we're like, oh, wow. That's never what you really want to see when you are going through a packet capture and you're like, oh, let's see where this IP geolocates to, right? And it's like, oh, crap. Which we kind of had an idea that this was the case just based off our competitor and the other information we had gotten, but it's wildly different to actually see it for yourself.
Yeah, so as Todd said, like in this particular case, the attackers went through a lot of steps and used a lot of creativity, which at the time really hadn't been seen in anything with regards to kind of the persistence, the ways they were doing things, everything like that. So of course you're going to find, something that is whitelisted from everything, including itself, because that makes a perfect staging ground for all of your stuff, because none of your automated tools are going to look there. You're going to, of course, get onto a server which can never be taken down because it's absolutely critical to the business operations. Like, you're going to work through all of that. So one of the challenges for this is we had to come up with ways to actually remediate and mitigate the situation, but at the same time minimize downtime, because literally every minute was costing them so much money. So we had to try to make the overall impact as absolutely small as possible. Fortunately, working with them, and as this got elevated up to sea levels and stuff, they actually realized that there was a big problem here, and there was actually business buy-off in, okay, we have to do something before this gets absolutely horribly, horribly out of hand. So they gave us about a 5-minute window in order to take everything down, bring everything back up, and hopefully have everything good to go. We got it down to about 3 minutes total downtime, which doesn't sound like all that much, but when you're a global company who's doing business every minute of every day, like 3 minutes is a long time for the entire company to be completely down. So the other downside, the kind of flip side to that is, like, we had to be 100% sure beforehand, like when we actually did this, like this was actually gonna 100% eliminate the stuff that we already knew about. Like, at this point, we weren't planning for things that we potentially thought could happen or anything like that. Like, we had to make sure that when we did these steps, when we took steps X, Y, and Z, like that was actually gonna be 100% effective in stopping this attack completely in its tracks. So we gave a lot of thought to it. We figured out that we could remove the web pages, remove the persistence mechanisms of WMI and everything like that. Like, we could do all of that, and we could actually get it down, minimum downtime, and then get it right back up. And hopefully everything would be restored back to its actual clean state. So fortunately for us in that particular point, that was very successful. And this entire incident it was a large incident, but it was about 5 of us total working on it, and we spent about 350 hours total over the course of probably about a 6-week period or so working through all of this. We also had one of the most interesting things that came from all of this is we had literally a initial basic compromise of an environment all the way up to the incredibly sophisticated last-ditch effort that they had to try to maintain a foothold. So we had the entire attack lifecycle. We had the IOCs for all of that we could then take and share with essentially, everybody who provided us IOCs, everybody at all. Like, we just shared this information back because it was incredibly useful, because this ended up impacting a large amount of companies, as you see, we'll get to in a little bit. So one of the things that was incredibly beneficial for all of this as well is, obviously, Callahan Auto was incredibly willing to share this information back, because some companies will just be like, no, like, we're not allowed to share this information back because they're our competitors and everything to that effect. In this particular case, they realized, like, it's probably best to share this information back because they're going through the same stuff. This is actually, if this actually continues and this compromise ends up escalating, like, it will probably actually end up affecting our business in the long term. So from a business perspective, it's actually much better for us to share this information now and hopefully stop it where it was. And again, as we talked through the whole thing, like, the personal relationships that you form, your network of people that you know and talk to and associate with, like, that actually allowed a lot of things to happen, which in our case worked out perfectly, but in most situations, it's incredibly abnormal. So we were able to very, very quickly take down the online infrastructure that was used by attackers. Generally, if you see C2 domains, like, you can block the traffic internally on your firewall, but it's kind of hard to go to an entity and say, I need you to take down all of these domains because something bad is happening. Like, again, fortunately, happen to know people who knew the right people in order to make something like that happen. Again, they shared back information with us that they couldn't actually tell us the specific things to look for. They could just tell us general ideas of concepts of things for us to look at and then hopefully work on down through that. And then that actually allowed them, for all of their users to actually build the IOCs out and help protect their users as well as our end client user as well. Throughout the course of the entire engagement, we had about 50 unique pieces of malware. Out of those, I would say probably at the time, 47 of them, I believe, were actually never seen before at all. All they had ever seen was the initial attack piece, and that was it. That was shared back with, again, all of the entities that we could possibly share the information back. And one of the things that was hugely interesting timing-wise is that we shared it back to the government, and then a government agency who I will not name publicly, but you can clearly read on what they actually do, happened to magically discover that they had a breach that was very similar in style to the stuff that we were going through. So again, because we were able to share back the full attack lifecycle, like it didn't matter if they were in the initial stages of reconnaissance, if they were embedded for just a little while, or if they had full control of the entire environment, like they had the malware and the IOCs to look for to say, okay, these are the things that we need to look for to try to get these guys out of our network as quickly as possible. And now, this is the fun part.
So now we come back up to 2018, and so in October 2018, the first indictments were issued in the case. It allowed us to also speak about it and also gave us some insights, because we kind of knew what we knew about it, and we knew what our competitors or customers knew about it, but we didn't necessarily know the whole scope, so which was kind of really interesting to see exactly how it started. So what we found out was the attackers were from the MSS, which is in this particular providential foreign arm of MSS, mostly dedicated to targeting the specific industry that we were working in. Included 6 agents were included in the initial indictment, and then 2 Chinese nationals that actually worked for the first company that got whacked. So they were actually employees, and high enough employees that they could actually tip off these guys when something happened, which made it kind of difficult to actually start detecting initially, because their IR team would detect a domain, and then they would send it over to China, and the guys would go, they would call and they'd say, hey, are we worried about that domain? And they'd go, yes, and then they would just change it. So they literally had inside information throughout the whole thing. And the attack in total focused on 13 companies in total, all working on the supply chain of the specific target product that they were trying to get information on. And the target product owners were the first ones to become compromised through their Chinese facilities. So that's kind of how the whole thing kicked off. They found, good old spy techniques of insider threat and actually engaging people inside the company were still a very valuable asset. So yeah, you read that right. So multifaceted, using insider threat, and recently I found another article and got some information. They actually used human intelligence, where they actually had people posing as colleagues in China, and were flying engineers from companies to Belgium and meeting and talking about these products. And and unfortunately, engineers, they love to talk about their work. In one way, we like to encourage creativity and all that stuff, but in another way, they become really easy targets, right? Because then they go and fly over to Belgium and they're meeting with basically the enemy, giving them all the data on what they actually do. Because when you design something really cool, right, you want to tell everybody about it. And they spent an incredible amount of resources, money, energy, went into this so that they could actually target and get this product line. So most of the target companies were US-based. There was 2 UK-based companies that are also involved in this product line that they went after. Human intelligence sources in the EU. And then the only serious international target we saw outside of that was actually China itself, which was the original facility compromised. So they really focused on a particular core area that they were trying to go after. And what we found out, the first attack outside of the insiders actually doing their part started in January of 2010. They ran all the way to about May of 2015 before they kind of trailed off, although the intelligence type attacks happened after that 2016 timeframe, I think just kind of finishing up, getting the last little bit of information that they needed. And then also in 2014. And a successful IOC sharing medium would have been hugely helpful, right? Because we would have been able to ingest that much earlier and hopefully detected this before these guys got so much foothold. So attackers, again, they went after specific silent. The goal was to make a comparable product to compete against the United States. And unfortunately, because indicator sharing and all that stuff wasn't up, they mostly achieved that goal. So in the 2018-2019 timeframe, they were able to issue a very similar product. You could probably read through between the lines and figure out what that is if you really try. And that hurt everybody in the business vertical, right? Because whenever China gets involved in a business segment, it makes it very difficult on us because we don't get government subsidies, right? So we have to pay full labor, full cost, all that to build such things. So how they did it, so again, from old-fashioned insider participation to intel techniques, spy techniques, human stuff, just about anything you could come up with. You know, the picture's kind of funny, but I really wish they would have broke the USB drive they used to start off the incident with. Would have saved a number of weeks of my life traveling. Right. And then just a myriad of techniques against any company. Unfortunately, the companies they target, or fortunately, I guess, depending on how you look at it, it was an entire supply chain. And as you can imagine, the top tier supplier is well-equipped, well-funded, very good intel teams, good IR teams, all that. So they had to be much more sophisticated. And as they worked their way down the supply chain, they could kind of ratchet it back a little bit. So the old adage, the attacker's only going to use as much force as necessary, is really true, right? So you see how things like waterhole phishing, just a myriad of different stuff because of the different capabilities that the supply chain actually had to actually detect and defend against the attack.
So again, you know, as we try to stress through this, the course of this entire presentation, like information sharing is huge. Like it doesn't matter how small or unimportant you think the little tidbit of information is. Like more than likely, if you have an IOC or an indicator or even just like an OSINT thread or something like that, just any information that you can share back with other people, like that is so huge and so important. And you know, building up the personal relationships, doing things like networking and coming to conferences like this and your local like B-sides and stuff like that, like just networking and getting to know more people in your community is hugely, hugely important. Because again, like we didn't break any rules, we didn't do anything wrong, we didn't share information that was protected or classified or anything like that. Like we literally just talked to each other because we had a problem and we knew that they're out there, like if we all work together, like we would actually come up with a solution for this. And it's also incredibly important, like when you go back to like your internal companies and stuff like that, like it's important to talk to them, like the importance of I want to share information, I want to share intelligence with people. Like I don't want to share product line information and stuff like that. Like I want to share the indicators because more than likely they're seeing the same sort of things. And if maybe one attacker is further along in the life cycle and is more advanced than another or something like that, and that can actually help the entire community all by itself. And one of the key points that I want to highlight with all of that is like that helps business operations all by itself. Like sharing information and sharing indicators, like that actually helps companies stay profitable and remain profitable because it's not that there's less competition or anything like that. It's essentially to the point of, oh, I can actually spend my time and resources on development and engineering and stuff like that rather than spending ridiculous amounts of money responding to an incident that if people had just talked like 18 months earlier, like it would have never even materialized into an incident at all. Also, you have to put, again, as I said, you have to put away, you know, your personal feelings. Like you may not like a company, you may not like an individual person or something like that, but like you have to talk to them, you have to share with your network because it doesn't matter how big your team is or how much money you spend on security or anything like that. Like you can have multi-billion-dollar security budget or you can have a $3.50 security budget. And the people with the $3.50 budget, like they spend their money every way, the wisest way possible, so they're in a much better spot than people just buying ridiculous amounts of machines and just lining up in a data center. And again, you know, it doesn't matter how small or how important or unimportant you think some bit of information is, like every piece is absolutely valuable. And that goes back to our adversaries are sharing information. I mean, this was a 5-year operation. That is an incredible amount of time and resources and overhead just to even like do the initial part of, okay, we're working on setting everything up. Like they had a very, very strategic long-term goal planned out of like, this is what we're gonna do to try to achieve our goals. So the bad guys are talking to each other, like we should be talking to each other as well. It also should be, we should also be communicating with things like red teams, blue teams, purple teams. Like, they all should be talking with each other as well. It shouldn't be the red teamers never talk to the blue teamers or anything like that. Like, everybody needs to try to learn from each other as much as they possibly can. And this is actually probably my favorite slide in the entire thing, because if you don't engage red team services and like try to see like what holes and vulnerabilities that you have in your environment, like, there are adversaries who will absolutely do that for you for free. And you don't want to be that person who essentially gets that stuff for free. Like, generally, you want to make sure that you have an idea of the stuff that you're looking for, rather than having a full-blown incident and finding out like, oh yeah, we've been popped for a very, very long amount of time. This is my absolute favorite video of all time. As you can see, there was the 5 any firewall rule, and that's unfortunately the IR team. In the middle of our incident, when we find out that our actual firewall rule had, for whatever reason, had 5 any's on it. And actually, ironically enough, yes, you can actually have not just any, you can have up to 5 any's on firewall rules, which is absolutely ridiculous that you even should have that option. But you can, and we actually found that inadvertently through an investigation we did about a year ago. And since then, that has kind of become our running theme. Not with that amazing video, of course. The video is just, all by itself, is absolutely incredible. And one thing, if you take nothing else away from this, other than that video, because that video was absolutely amazing, is when you hire a person, regardless of that person, like, you also essentially hire the people that they talk to, their network as well. And that is incredibly, incredibly valuable to you as a company, you as an individual. Like, you're not just hiring a person, you're hiring also the people that they know and associate with. And that is absolutely, absolutely a huge point to hammer home. Cool, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.